Welcome back to the Ludomancer's Vault, and today we're going to talk about magic. And in Clan War, the miniatures game, magic is performed by Shugenja, or Mahotsukai. And Shugenja are using elemental spells and elemental magic. Typically, Unicorn Clan have their own kind of special spirit magic. The evil people of the Shadowlands use Maho, or blood magic, as it's called in this universe. And finally, there is also pearl magic, used by the Naga, which will not be addressed today. I got a request to talk about how magic works. I am not an expert in using magic because I typically run the Crab Clan, and I have run the Dragon Clan a bit. So I have a little bit of experience with magic, and we have a friend of ours here today, Togashi Yoshi, who is a Dragon Clan Shugenja. You can see he's just wearing his leisure suit instead of any kind of armor. Typically, your Shugenja are going to be accompanied by Yojimbo, some bodyguards. So this is a guy dressed up as a Dragon Clan samurai bodyguard. I've also run a couple of Crab Shugenja. I use this guy as a proxy for Kuni Sensen, one of the Kuni Shugenja that are available. The Crab don't have a lot of magic users, and converted up a Yojimbo for him. This was actually a Lion Clan miniature that I did up in Crab colors. That's his Yojimbo. Typically, Shugenja will appear on the battlefield in one of two ways. They'll either be in a unit or of their own, or they'll be in a formed unit. Oh, by the way, we shouldn't leave out, if you want to talk about powerful spellcasters, this is Togashi Yokuni, who is the Daimyo of the Dragon Clan at the time of the Clan War setting. And in addition to being really good with two swords, he's also really good with magic. And if he wants to, he can transform into a dragon. Maybe we'll see him in action one of these days. But he's another example of a Shugenja. Again, there's only 4 pages of rules in the book. But Shugenja units here, as you can see in the illustration, are typically made up of Shugenja and their bodyguards. They must include 1 to 3 Yojimbo for each Shugenja. And they're basically a skirmishing unit, and the target number of the Yojimbo is used if somebody shoots at them. And you really want to keep them out of the way so that they don't get charged in close combat. Now, if they're not in a Shugenja unit, they can join a regular formed unit. If they're a combat Shugenja, they can join the formed unit, and they will lead that unit from the front, and they can even fight in close combat. So, as an example of a Shugenja personality, we can take a look here at Togashi Yoshi's profile. Togashi Yoshi is a pretty expensive character, 210 points. And he has Magic 5, Battle 1, which means he can lead a unit, Leadership 2, and EI Jutsu 3. So he can actually duel pretty well. He has Void 5. So one of the reasons he's so expensive, I think, is that he's a really good duelist. And he's also powerful. Shugenja, he has an innate special ability. Target a personality you control within 18 inches. As that personality enters a duel, Yoshi becomes spent. The target personality may roll 2 additional damage dice during the duel. So he's got a lot of tools in his tool bag. He can fight, he can cast spells, he can lead a unit, and he can make your other duelists really powerful. So that's what a Shugenja profile might look like. Now, he's sort of on the expensive end. There are much cheaper Shugenja available. And I just wanted to use him as an example of something that you might see. So what about the other guy, Kuni Sensen, that I mentioned? He's a bit cheaper. See, he's only 78 points. but he's Magic 4, Leadership 2, Defense 1. He's not a combat character. He does not have battle, so he cannot join a formed unit. But he has some automatic abilities in there. Kiso. When selecting spells, he may take one Earth spell scroll at 0 cost. And the cost of all of his non-Earth spell scrolls are increased by 5 Koku each. So he's good with Earth spells. He's a Magic 4 instead of a Magic 5. But that's about all he does. He doesn't lead units. He doesn't fight very well. He doesn't buff up anybody else's abilities in terms of duels or anything like that. But 68 points, it's cheap. You can get them on the table and get some help for the rest of your units. So as I said, they typically come in a unit of a Shugenja. With Yojimbo, they'll appear on the field as a skirmishing unit. And you really want to keep them out of the way of getting charged or attacked, if at all possible, because they're going to be pretty vulnerable. Very small unit. So again, Maho is outlawed blood magic. That's used by the bad guys. I'm not going to read every word, but I'm going to go over some of the basic concepts. Wounds are caused when you use Maho. So if you're using the Shadowlands, get used to the idea that your guys are going to hurt themselves to power up their magic or maybe damage your units. And then in terms of how magic works in this game, when you're actually playing the game, it's pretty simple. But there are a number of rules that limit how you can take your casters and select spells for them. So, and it says in magical limits, there's a number of limits to spell casting. The most basic magical limit is that a Shugenja may only cast one spell per turn. So no matter how many spells they have, or how many points you spent on them, or how powerful they might be, including innate abilities, which are considered spells, you can only do it once per turn. So however many points you're going to spend on them, just remember, they're probably, if you're lucky, they're going to do one thing a turn for you. And then that's about it. So the question is, are they going to be worth it to run in your unit? And that'll depend on the army. Certain clans like Phoenix are very reliant on magic, and they have characters who have very strong magical abilities and are probably certainly worthwhile. Other clans, you may want to concentrate on playing to your strengths. But there are some circumstances that they're very useful for anybody, and we'll talk about that. Now, there's also the maximum number of scrolls. So what are scrolls? So your spells in this game, basically, your Shugenja have scrolls, and they cast their spells based on the number of scrolls that they have. In order to cast any spell, you have to have the scroll. So you pay points for the scrolls when you build your army. If the scroll is destroyed, then it can't be used again in the rest of the battle. And some scrolls are automatically destroyed. So you purchase them at the start of play during army construction. Some of them have specific elements, like we saw. Kuni Sensen gets a free Earth spell, Earth scroll. Shugenja may not possess more elemental scrolls than the value of his air ring, and may not possess more Maho scrolls than the value of their Earth ring. So just remember to look at their card and make sure that you're not buying more scrolls than are in there, that they have in their air ring or their earth ring, depending on what it is. You may purchase multiple scrolls of the same type. So, for example, Windborne Speed. If you want your units to move fast, you can get more than one of those in case one of the scrolls gets destroyed. Once they're destroyed, immediately they'll be removed from the game. And you can no longer cast that spell unless you get the same one. Spells also have ranks. So there's levels of spells. And in order to use the spell, you have to have the magic skill. So, for example, Yoshi has magic 5. He can use a level 5 scroll. Seisen only has 4, so he can only use up to level 4. Same with Maho. And if something reduces your skill during the battle, you lose the ability to cast that spell from that scroll, unless you regain it. In addition, you have a maximum number of castings for each spell. So that is your ring. So in this case, I've previously said you don't have to worry about rings too much, but here with Shugenja you do. So for example, if you have a water spell and you have a water value, a ring value of 3, you can only cast it 3 times in a game. There are also innate abilities. Many Shugenja have mastered spell-like effects, which they may produce without possessing a scroll. They appear in their profiles as innates. They're treated as a spell in every way, except no scroll is required and no effect can destroy an innate. They do not also have a maximum number of castings, or count against your maximum number of scrolls. If you're broken, routed, spent, or within a unit that's flanked, you cannot use your innate ability, unless it is a Kiso. Kisos are basically, I think it's fair to say, always available abilities. No effect in the game will get rid of them unless it specifically says so. Now, when you're casting a spell that's going to affect an enemy unit, it will frequently have a resistance test. They don't all have resistance tests, but a resistance test is the way in which basically a unit that's targeted by a spell gets a saving throw. So a resistance test is the attempt made by a unit or personality to use sheer will to throw off the effects of a spell that is targeting it. Not all spells and innates allow them a target to make a resistance roll. If they do, they provide a target number. When making a resistance test against a spell, so how do we do this procedure? You'll roll a die. Unless the spell states otherwise, no modifiers applied to the resistance test except for the following. If the spell is targeting a personality or a unit which the personality is leading, the earth ring of the personality may provide a modifier to the resistance test. And then there's actually a little chart here. So it's not so simple as just knowing what their earth ring is, believe it or not. If the personality has an earth of 3 to 4, +1. If it's 5 to 6, it's +2. And if it's 7 or above, it's +3. So you have to have a minimum earth of 3 to get any kind of modifier to your roll. They may also have a resistance trait. So there are personalities in the game that say are resistance 2, and that will create a modifier. If you have a resistance 2, you get +2 or 3, +3 to all resistance tests. Compare the final roll result to the TN, and if it's equal to or greater than the TN, the test is successful. Otherwise, it fails. If the resistance test is successful, the spell has no effect. If it fails, then it keeps going. There are a lot of spell attacks. A Shugenja that performs any kind of attack is not eligible to perform reserve movement or participate in range or close combat. So if you're using a magical attack of any kind, you don't get to do any other kind of attacking, and you don't get reserve movement. Any spell that is a ranged attack is cast during the ranged attack phase. So a lot of spells are special orders or special actions, as we see when we look at spells. Ranged attack spells are not. They are used in the ranged attacks phase, and they are resolved with all the other ranged attacks. So if you have a unit of folks who have bows and arrows and a Shugenja with them, they'll shoot their arrows, and the Shugenja will cast their spell, their ranged attack spell, at the same time. And they're resolved together. If you're engaged with a unit that has a Shugenja in it, you can cast your spells, but you cannot use your ranged attacks. And you can't make close combat attacks if you've already made a magical attack. So the example given is Isawa Tomo casts Tomb of Jade at an Oni, which is a kill the Oni spell. And if they're still fighting in the close combat phase, Tomo's not going to be able to make any other attacks. That's all that Tomo could do. You can only target your own unit or a unit with which you're engaged with spell effects when engaged. Spells which could target your own unit are not considered magical attacks. So the example given here is if they use Biting Steel, the unit that you are with can get a +2 attack and +2 damage from Biting Steel. And because you didn't use an attack in the special action phase, then that Shugenja would still get to attack themselves with that bonus. So spells, here's a whole bunch of spells. I counted 27 spells. I'm not going to go through all of them. The cards are broken down by name, traits, description, type, which is their element or maho, their rank, their range, and their cost. All right, so let's take a look at Gust of Wind. Gust of Wind is a special action, so you'll cast that in the special action phase. Target a unit you control. Once during the turn, that unit may target a ranged attack directed against it. That ranged attack is negated. No attack dice are rolled. The casting Shugenja becomes spent immediately after the spell is cast. So remember, they're going to stay out of action until the next special action phase there, till the end of the next special action phase. If they cast Gust of Wind, it's an air type scroll. It's a rank 2, has an 18-inch range, and then this is the number of points that you pay to include it in your army. So I'm not going to go through all the spells. As I said, there's 27 of them. They generally either buff your units or attack the enemy. And let's see, another useful one that I've seen used many times is Windborne Speed. So you've probably heard me say that movement can be a challenge in this game, that the units seem somewhat slow compared to other games. Well, here's a remedy for that. You can take Windborne Speed. It's an air rank 3 spell, 18-inch line of sight spell, 25 points. As a special action, target a unit you control. Until the end of the turn, they gain the cavalry trait and may move during the cavalry movement phase. So now your unit of heavy crab samurai now move in the cavalry phase. They're going to be dangerous. Right? There is a counter spell ability where you can create a resistance test to negate the target spell. So your Shugenjas can basically like stop one another if they have that counter spell scroll. I fought against the Shadowlands before with the crab and used Jade Strike. Ranged attack targets an enemy unit that contains one or more tainted models. The Jade Strike has 2 attack and +2 damage. Roll 5 attack dice, resolving hits normally. So that's a ranged attack. Earth type spell, range 3, 18-inch line of sight, cost 15. You'd have to use that in the ranged attack phase. Right? So that's a pretty good spell if you're fighting Shadowlands otherwise, or somebody who has tainted folks. The one they mentioned earlier in the example, Biting Steel, special action. Target a personality you control. This may not target an airborne personality. Until the end of the turn, the target personality gets +2/+2. The cost for the scroll is 15 koku for a dragon Shugenja. So the dragons get a discount on that. Isn't that nice? So you can buff one of your characters with that, as long as they're not flying at the time. That's pretty cool. Here's one that hits really hard. Fury of Asano Wo, magical attack, range attack. Target enemy unit, roll a number of attack dice equal to the casting Shugenja's Ring of Fire. This attack has +1 attack and damage. Determine hits and apply damage normally. So if you've got a high fire ring, like 5 or 6, you can roll a lot of dice with that. So again, usually their attacks, their buffs, Wall of Fire. This is so you can create basically obstacles on the table for people. If they go through it, then they take damage. Not a great idea. Here's an example of one that has a resistance test, Draining the Life. It's a Maho spell, so it's going to be used by the bad guys. It's a range attack. You target an enemy unit, and they take an immediate resistance test, so TN7. So if they pass it, your spell does nothing. If they fail, it's going to go off. And by the way, the closer you are, then the harder it gets for them. If the test fails, they take 3 wounds, and the caster regains a wound. There's some spells that allow you to bring people onto the boards. Summon Undead Champion. You can sacrifice a personal wound from the caster, plus 3 wounds from the unit, and then you get a free champion model. Right, so there are just a large variety of cool things that you can do with spells. And they have mostly the function of being used in the special action, the special orders phase. But if it's a ranged attack or a magical attack, it'll tell you in bolded text. And that is basically how magic works in the game. If you are looking for ways to defend against magic, then you want to take people with high earth rings for resistance tests if you get a chance to do that. There are some other options in the game. For example, in the tactical deck, a very useful card called Beyond Your Mastery. When You can use this from your tactical deck if a Shigenja casts a spell as a reaction. Target the Shigenja as he uses a scroll to produce a spell effect. The scroll for the spell being cast is destroyed. The Shigenja may not use that scroll again for the duration of the battle. If they have multiple scrolls then of the same spell, they could use it. And that spell currently being cast unaffected. So if somebody keeps hitting you with the Fury of Asano, well, you can say, okay, you know what? That's the last time you're doing that to me. So beyond your mastery, having other spellcasters with counterspell, or having people in your army, for example, like Hida Kisada, the Daimyo of the Crab Clan, who just says no to all spells for him and his unit, are ways that you can offset the potential havoc caused by Shigenja. Now, they do tend to be expensive. Most of them are in these skirmishy units. They're not going to have a great battlefield presence, so you do need to do a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not the spells that you're bringing or the nature of that Shigenja and their abilities is going to be worthwhile for you. And again, certain armies are probably going to take a couple, and others might take one or none, depending on how useful their selection of Shigenja are and whether their army focuses on magic. But that's it. It's really 4 pages of rules on spells, and then I think I counted 27 spells here in the rule book. You know, if you're interested in taking Shigenja, you should go through your army list, take a look at all the different Shigenja available, see which ones synergize with your playstyle or your army composition. Or if you're having certain difficulties against certain enemies, for example, you play against the crane and you're constantly getting bombarded by arrows, then you may want to take a Shigenja and customize them to be anti-ranged attack to help protect your units. In addition to your tactical deck, where you'll put things like Turtle Shell, you could take Gust of Wind or other abilities that help you to blunt the impact of the ranged attacks of your enemies. So that's how magic goes in Legend of the Five Rings Clan War. Hopefully in an upcoming battle report, I'll be able to show you a little bit of magic in action. And we will see you next time on the battlefield. Thanks for watching.